Welcome to Eternal Darkness, where nightmares come to life. I'll be your host through these twisted tales tonight. Before we descend into the shadows, remember to like and subscribe to join our growing community of horror enthusiasts. Get comfortable, turn down the lights, and prepare yourself as we begin our journey into the unknown. The flames danced higher as I fed another log into the fire, casting our faces in flickering orange light. We had gathered around the campfire that evening, passing around trail mix and sharing stories from our various missions. The autumn air carried a crisp bite that made us huddle closer to the warmth. My companion from the Northern Territories, Elder Rodriguez, had been unusually quiet all evening. Rodriguez was typically the most animated among us, always ready with a joke or a story that would have us all laughing until our sides ached. But tonight, something weighed heavily on him. His dark eyes kept darting to the shadows beyond our circle of light, and his hands trembled slightly as he held his cup of hot chocolate. The nervous energy radiating from him was impossible to ignore. "There's something I need to tell you all," Rodriguez finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. The casual chatter around the fire died instantly. "Something that happened during my assignment near the Crow Reservation in Montana. I've been carrying this for months, and it's eating at me from the inside." The wind picked up, sending sparks spiraling into the darkness above us. Rodriguez stared into the flames as if they might provide him with the courage to continue. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard, and I noticed beads of sweat forming on his forehead despite the cool evening air. "My mission covered a massive territory," he began, his words measured and careful. "Most of it was standard suburban areas, but there was this remote section near the reservation that we rarely visited. The locals always seemed uncomfortable when we mentioned that area, crossing themselves or quickly changing the subject. I should have paid more attention to those warning signs." Rodriguez paused, running his hands through his hair. The fire crackled, sending shadows dancing across his face, making him look years older than his 21 years. When he continued, his voice carried a tremor that made my skin crawl. 3 months ago, Elder Thompson and I got a call about some investigators living way out in that territory. They were eager to learn about the faith, so we made the long drive out there. The meeting went well, really well actually. But as we were heading back, our gas gauge started dropping faster than it should have. By the time we realized we were running on fumes, we were in the middle of nowhere. The memory seemed to physically pain him. Rodriguez clutched his cup tighter, his knuckles white against the ceramic. We sat on that empty road for what felt like hours. No cell service, no other cars, just endless stretches of scrubland and those rolling hills that seemed to watch us. Finally, this old rancher came by with a spare gas can. Nice guy. But when he found out where we'd been, his whole demeanor changed. He kept glancing over his shoulder while he filled our tank like something might be following us. Rodriguez's breathing became shallow as he delved deeper into his story. The rest of us remained silent, sensing that whatever he was about to reveal would change how we viewed our own missions forever. It was past 11 when we finally got back on the road. He continued. "Thompson fell asleep almost immediately. The poor guy had been up since 5 that morning. I was tired too, but I wanted to get us home safely, so I pushed the speed limit. 45 miles per hour on those winding back roads, headlights cutting through absolute darkness." He took a shuddering breath, and I noticed his hands were now visibly shaking. At first I thought I was seeing things. You know how your eyes play tricks on you when you're tired? Shadows that look like movement, tree branches that seem to reach out. But this was different. There were shapes moving parallel to the car, just at the edge of my headlight beam. The fire popped loudly, making several of us jump. Rodriguez didn't seem to notice. His eyes were fixed on something beyond our circle, as if he were seeing that night all over again. I figured it was wildlife, coyotes maybe, or deer, but these shapes were moving too deliberately too. purposefully, and they were keeping pace with the car perfectly. Not falling behind, not running ahead, just maintaining this exact distance that kept them barely visible. Rodriguez leaned forward, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. Then one of them moved closer to my window. I looked down, expecting to see an animal. He paused, his face going pale in the firelight. What I saw instead made me slam on the brakes so hard that Thompson went flying forward into the dashboard. The anticipation around the fire was thick enough to cut. None of us dared to speak, afraid we might break whatever spell was allowing Rodriguez to finally share his burden. Thompson woke up screaming, demanding to know what was wrong. All I could manage was to tell him to pray. Right then, right there, as hard as he could. I couldn't explain what I'd seen because I wasn't even sure I believed it myself, but I floored the accelerator and drove the rest of the way home in complete silence, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went numb. Rodriguez looked directly at me, and the terror in his eyes was unmistakable. When I glanced down, I saw 5 or 6 human figures running on all fours alongside the car. Not crawling, running. Their limbs moved with this horrible, unnatural coordination, like they'd been doing it their whole lives. And they were keeping pace with us at 40 miles per hour. The silence that followed Rodriguez's revelation seemed to stretch for an eternity. I found myself scanning the darkness beyond our campfire, suddenly aware of how exposed we were out here in the wilderness. The night sounds, crickets, distant owl calls, rustling leaves, now seemed menacing rather than peaceful. That should have been the end of it, Rodriguez continued, his voice gaining strength as if sharing the burden was lifting some weight from his shoulders. I should have requested a transfer, found some excuse to avoid that area. But 3 weeks later I got reassigned to a small outpost near the reservation. Just my luck. He laughed bitterly, the sound cutting through the night air like broken glass. The housing was this old trailer that the previous missionaries had abandoned. When I saw it, I understood why. It sat alone on this barren plot of land, with one flickering streetlight that barely illuminated the front steps. The nearest neighbor was miles away. Rodriguez described the trailer in detail that made my stomach turn. Rust streaks ran down its aluminum siding like dried blood. The windows were cracked and taped, and the front door hung slightly crooked on its hinges. Inside, the furniture was sparse and worn, and every surface was covered with a fine layer of dust that suggested recent abandonment. My new companion, Elder Brooks, was fresh from the missionary training center. Eager, faithful, completely unprepared for what we were walking into. I didn't have the heart to tell him about my previous encounter. How could I explain something that sounded completely insane? The first night in the trailer had been deceptively quiet. Rodriguez and Brooks had performed their evening prayers, studied their scriptures, and settled into their narrow beds early. The old heater rattled and hummed, providing a comforting white noise that helped Rodriguez relax for the first time in weeks. At exactly 2:15 in the morning, something started pounding on the front door. Rodriguez said, his voice tight with remembered fear. Not knocking, pounding, like someone was trying to break it down with their bare fists. Brooks and I both shot out of bed, hearts racing. They had approached the door cautiously, Rodriguez in the lead with Brooks close behind. The pounding continued, rhythmic and insistent, echoing through the thin walls of the trailer. When Rodriguez flicked on the porch light and peered through the peephole, he saw nothing but empty darkness. I opened the door just a crack, thinking maybe someone needed help. But there was nobody there. The porch was empty, and I couldn't see any movement in the surrounding area. Brooks suggested maybe it was the wind, but the night was perfectly still. What happened next made Rodriguez's previous encounter seem like a pleasant dream. As they stood in the doorway, trying to make sense of the mysterious pounding, the sound suddenly shifted to the back of the trailer, then to the side, then back to the front, as if whatever was out there was deliberately circling their shelter. It was playing with us, Rodriguez said, his voice breaking slightly. Moving around the trailer in this slow, methodical pattern. Brooks was praying under his breath, and I was trying to convince myself it was just some local kids playing pranks. But deep down, I knew it was connected to what I'd seen on the road. They spent the rest of the night huddled in the living room, every light blazing, jumping at every creak and groan of the old trailer. When dawn finally broke, they ventured outside to investigate. What they found in the dirt around the trailer made Rodriguez's blood freeze. There were footprints everywhere, he said, his eyes wide with remembered horror. Human footprints, but spaced wrong, like someone had been crawling on their hands and feet, making a complete circle around our shelter. Some of the prints showed long scratches in the dirt, as if whoever made them had fingernails grown out like claws. Brooks had wanted to call the local authorities, but Rodriguez talked him out of it. How could they explain footprints that suggested people had been crawling around their trailer like animals? Who would believe such a story? The second night brought new horrors. The pounding returned, but this time it was accompanied by scratching sounds along the walls. Long, deliberate scrapes that moved from ground level to the roof and back down again. Brooks broke down crying, begging Rodriguez to explain what was happening to them. I told him everything, Rodriguez admitted. About the figures running alongside my car, about the rancher's warning, about the feeling that something had been following me ever since that first encounter. Brooks listened in stunned silence, and I could see him struggling to process it all. They decided to leave the trailer during daylight hours, spending their time visiting members and potential investigators in the area. But every evening they had to return to their temporary prison, knowing that something would be waiting for them in the darkness. Their breakthrough came from an unexpected source. During one of their daytime visits, they met Sister Martinez, an elderly Crow woman who had been investigating the church for several months. When she heard they were staying in the abandoned trailer, her face went ashen. She crossed herself and started speaking in her native language, Rodriguez recalled. When I asked her what was wrong, she looked around nervously and pulled us aside. She told us that the land around our trailer had a reputation among her people. Sister Martinez explained that for generations, her tribe had known about individuals who had lost their way in the spiritual world. People who had rejected their humanity and chosen to live as something else entirely. They moved through the darkness on all fours, she said, no longer bound by normal human limitations. She called them the Lost Ones, Rodriguez continued. According to tribal legend, they were people who had committed such terrible acts that they could no longer bear to walk upright among other humans. So they took to running on all fours, hunting in packs, existing somewhere between the world of the living and the world of the dead. The old woman's description matched perfectly with what Rodriguez had witnessed. She warned them that the Lost Ones were drawn to spiritual energy, particularly to those who carried strong faith. They saw such individuals as both a threat and a potential meal for their corrupted souls. Sister Martinez begged us to leave that trailer, Rodriguez said. She offered to let us stay with her family, but we couldn't abandon our assignment. We were supposed to be there for another week, and I couldn't bring myself to run away from whatever was stalking us. That decision nearly cost them their lives. The third night in the trailer brought the most terrifying encounter yet. The Lost Ones didn't content themselves with circling the building or scratching at the walls. This time they tried to get inside. Rodriguez's voice became barely audible as he described the events of that third night. The campfire seemed to dim, as if even the flames were reluctant to illuminate such horrors. Brooks and I were lying in our beds, listening to the usual scratching and pounding, when we heard something new, he whispered. The sound of the trailer door handle being turned. Slowly, deliberately, like someone was testing to see if it was locked. They had secured every possible entry point, but the trailer was old and flimsy. The door frame creaked ominously as something pushed against it from outside. Brooks grabbed his scriptures and began reading aloud, his voice shaking but determined. Rodriguez clutched his own set of scriptures, adding his voice to the desperate prayers. Then we heard voices, Rodriguez continued, his face pale with remembered terror. Human voices, but wrong somehow. They were whispering to each other in what sounded like English, but the words were slurred and distorted, like they hadn't used human speech in years. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. Rodriguez could make out fragments, discussions of how to get inside, debates about whether to wait or force their way in. The voices circled the trailer, sometimes directly outside their bedroom window, sometimes at the front door, sometimes on the roof above their heads. Brooks started hyperventilating, Rodriguez said. I had to hold him down to keep him from running outside. I knew instinctively that if we left the trailer, we'd never make it to the car alive. Whatever was out there was patient, organized, and completely inhuman despite their human origins. The siege lasted until dawn. As the first rays of sunlight appeared on the horizon, the whispers faded and the scratching stopped. Rodriguez and Brooks found fresh scratches on every window and door, deep gouges in the metal that spoke of incredible strength and determination. Most disturbing were the handprints pressed against the windows. Clearly human in shape, but with fingers elongated beyond natural proportions. That morning, we packed everything and drove straight to Sister Martinez's house, Rodriguez admitted. I wasn't proud of running, but I knew we couldn't survive another night in that trailer. She took one look at us and started preparing a cleansing ritual, insisting that we had attracted the attention of forces beyond our understanding. Sister Martinez's house provided temporary sanctuary, but Rodriguez soon realized that the lost ones hadn't given up their pursuit. They had simply expanded their territory, following the missionaries wherever they went in the region. 3 days later, we had to drive Sister Martinez to a family gathering on the far side of the reservation, Rodriguez continued. It was broad daylight, and I thought we'd be safe. But as we drove through this dense section of forest, I started seeing movement in the trees. The shapes were more visible in daylight, though they stayed deep in the shadows of the pine forest. Rodriguez counted at least 8 distinct figures moving parallel to their car, sometimes upright against tree trunks, sometimes loping through the underbrush on all fours. Sister Martinez noticed them too and began chanting softly in her native language. She told me to stop the car, Rodriguez said. I thought she was crazy, but something in her voice made me pull over. We sat there on that empty forest road, and she pointed to a gap between 2 large pine trees. In that gap stood a figure that Rodriguez would never forget. Tall and gaunt, it balanced on its hind legs like a person, but held its arms low like an animal preparing to drop to all fours. Its hair was long and matted, its clothes torn and stained beyond recognition. Most disturbing were its eyes, still human, but filled with a hunger that spoke of complete spiritual corruption. Sister Martinez said something to it in Crow, Rodriguez whispered. The thing tilted its head like it was listening, then let out this sound, part human scream, part animal howl. The other shapes in the forest took up the call, and suddenly the woods were filled with this horrible chorus. Instead of attacking, however, the creatures began to withdraw. Sister Martinez explained later that she had told them the missionaries were under tribal protection, that harming them would bring consequences the lost ones weren't prepared to face. It was a bluff, but one backed by centuries of tradition and spiritual authority. We drove away from there in silence, Rodriguez said, but I could feel them watching us from the tree line. I knew this wasn't over. It was just a temporary reprieve. The final encounter came 2 nights before Rodriguez was scheduled to leave the reservation territory. He and Brooks were staying with a local family when a severe thunderstorm rolled through the area. The power went out around midnight, leaving them in complete darkness except for occasional lightning flashes. That's when we heard the whistle, Rodriguez said. This long, piercing sound that rose and fell like a siren. It started far away but got closer with each repetition. Brooks and I knew immediately what it meant. They had found us again. The host family barricaded themselves in the back bedroom while Rodriguez and Brooks took positions by the front windows. Through the lightning flashes, they could see shapes moving across the yard, circling the house with the same methodical patience they had shown at the trailer. But this time was different, Rodriguez said, his voice gaining strength. I wasn't scared anymore. I was angry. These things had terrorized us for weeks, forced us to live in constant fear, and I was done running. I grabbed my scriptures and started reading aloud, not whispering prayers, but declaring them with every ounce of faith I possessed. Brooks joined in, and together they filled the house with words of protection and power. The whistling outside grew more agitated, and the shapes in the yard moved faster, more erratically, but they didn't approach the house directly. With each verse we read, they seemed to lose some of their confidence. Rodriguez continued. The lightning showed them retreating toward the tree line, and their whistle began to fade. By dawn, they were gone completely. Rodriguez finished his mission without further incident. The lost ones seemed to have accepted that he was beyond their reach, protected by faith that they could no longer touch. But the experience had changed him forever, leaving him with a deeper understanding of the spiritual battles that rage unseen around us every day. I'm telling you this story, Rodriguez concluded, looking around at our circle of faces, because I know some of you will end up in remote areas where these things still exist. They're not legends or myths. They're real people who have chosen to abandon their humanity. And if you ever encounter them, remember that faith is the only protection that really matters. They can sense fear, but they flee from true spiritual conviction. The fire had burned low during his telling, and dawn was beginning to touch the eastern horizon. As we prepared to head back to our own assignments, I found myself looking at the wilderness around us with new eyes, wondering what other lost ones might be watching from the shadows, waiting for their chance to test our faith against their hunger. The story Rodriguez shared that night stayed with me throughout my own mission and beyond. It served as a constant reminder that our spiritual battles are often more literal than we imagine, and that the darkness we fight isn't always metaphorical. Sometimes it runs on all fours through the night, whistling for our souls to join its corrupted pack. But it also reminded me that light always conquers darkness, that faith provides protection even in the most terrifying circumstances, and that those who walk in righteousness need never fear the things that prowl at the edges of civilization, forever lost to their own choices and forever hungry for what they can never reclaim. The summer of 2019 was particularly scorching in northern Michigan, but that didn't deter our plans. Me and my 3 closest friends, Henry, Jasper, and Noah, had been planning this trip for months. Noah's father owned a remote hunting cabin about 30 miles from the nearest town, nestled deep in the densely wooded wilderness where cell reception was spotty at best and non-existent at worst. I was 32 that year, the oldest of our group by only a few months. We'd all been friends since college, bonded by our shared love of the outdoors and an unspoken need to occasionally escape our increasingly demanding professional lives. This week-long retreat was meant to be restorative. Fishing, hiking, drinking beers around a fire, and reconnecting with both nature and each other. The drive up was filled with the usual banter and anticipation. We arrived at the dirt access road around noon, and from there, it was another 45 minutes of bumpy driving before we reached the cabin itself. "Home sweet home," Noah announced as we pulled into the small clearing. The cabin was rustic but solid, a 2-bedroom structure built from weathered logs with a stone chimney rising from its center. A wide porch wrapped around the front, complete with a pair of rocking chairs that had seen better days. The surrounding forest was thick with towering pines and ancient oaks, their canopies creating a perpetual twilight even in the height of day. The air smelled of pine sap and rich soil, undisturbed by the pollution of the city. In the distance, I could hear the gentle babbling of the creek Noah had promised would be full of trout. "Your dad really knows how to pick 'em," I said, inhaling deeply as I stepped out of the car. "Can't even hear a highway from here." "That's the point," Noah replied, unloading supplies from the trunk. "Dad always said the further you get from other people, the closer you get to yourself." Henry chuckled, lighting a cigarette. or the closer you get to being eaten by bears. The only predators around here are coyotes and the occasional mountain lion, Noah said with authority. Nothing we can't handle. Jasper, always the most observant among us, was already surveying the tree line with interest. There's a hunting platform in that oak, he noted, pointing to a sturdy-looking wooden structure about 15 feet up. Is that your dad's? Noah nodded. Built it himself about 10 years ago. Great spot for deer hunting in the fall. You can see the whole eastern approach to the clearing from up there. We spent the next hour unloading our gear and settling into the cabin. Inside, it was simple but comfortable. A main room with a stone fireplace and kitchenette, 2 bedrooms with bunk beds, and a small bathroom with running water, courtesy of a well and generator setup. As the afternoon progressed, I found myself drawn to the windows, studying the dense wall of trees that surrounded us. Despite the warm welcome of sunshine and birdsong, I couldn't shake a peculiar sensation, as if the forest was studying us just as intently in return. Who's up for some fishing? Jasper asked around 3 o'clock, already assembling his rod. The temperature had climbed to nearly 90 degrees, and the prospect of cool creek water was appealing to all of us. The path to the creek wound through the forest for about a quarter mile, barely visible beneath the undergrowth. Noah led the way confidently, having visited many times before with his father. Watch your step, he warned as we descended a steep embankment. Some of these rocks get slick, even in dry weather. The creek revealed itself suddenly, a 20-foot wide ribbon of clear water cutting through the forest floor, bordered by smooth stones and small sandy beaches. Fallen logs created natural bridges at various points, and the water gurgled pleasantly as it navigated around them. This is perfect, I said, already envisioning the trout that must be hiding in the deeper pools. We spread out along a 50-yard stretch, each claiming our own fishing spot. I found a promising location near a deeper pool where the water swirled lazily around a half-submerged log. The afternoon passed pleasantly, the 4 of us occasionally calling out when someone got a bite. I'd caught 2 modest-sized trout and was working on my 3rd when Henry's voice cut through the forest sounds. Guys, check this out! We converged on his position downstream. Henry was pointing at something in the water near the opposite bank. As we focused, I could make out the distinctive pattern of a water snake, its body undulating gracefully against the current. That's a northern water snake, Noah identified. Non-venomous, but they'll still bite if you mess with them. The snake was nearly 3 feet long, its dark body marked with brown and reddish bands. It moved with surprising speed against the current, hunting for small fish or frogs. Hold up, Jasper said, pulling out his phone to take a picture. This'll make a great shot. What happened next occurred so quickly that we barely had time to process it. As Jasper raised his phone, a shadow passed overhead. There was a rush of air, a splash, and suddenly a red-tailed hawk was rising from the creek, the snake writhing in its powerful talons. Holy! Henry's exclamation was cut short as we watched the hawk ascend, the snake fighting desperately in its grasp. The violence of nature played out above us as the hawk adjusted its grip mid-flight, the snake's struggles growing weaker. Then both predator and prey disappeared over the tree line, leaving us in stunned silence. Did you get that? I asked Jasper. He nodded, reviewing the sequence on his phone. Got the whole thing. That was intense. Nature's brutal, Noah said quietly. Dad always says we forget that when we're living in cities. The encounter left us subdued as we packed up our fishing gear. The sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon, lengthening the shadows around us. It was time to head back and prepare dinner. As we gathered our things, I noticed something odd about the forest. The ambient sounds, the birds, insects, and rustling leaves, had diminished significantly. The woods had grown unnaturally quiet, as if holding its collective breath. We should get back, I said, suddenly eager to return to the cabin's relative safety. It'll be dark soon. The path back seemed different somehow. Darker, more enclosed. I attributed it to the changing angle of the sun, but couldn't shake a growing unease. About halfway to the cabin, Noah stopped abruptly, causing me to nearly collide with him. "Look," he whispered, pointing to our right. Through the trees, perhaps 30 yards away, stood a deer. In Michigan, white-tailed deer are common enough, but my immediate impression was that something was off about this one. Even at a distance, it appeared unusually large. "That's a buck," Henry whispered. "Big one, too." As our eyes adjusted, I could make out more details. The deer was partially obscured by a large oak, but its head and neck were visible. What struck me was its posture. It wasn't grazing or moving, but standing perfectly still, its head turned directly toward us. "Is it just me, or is that thing watching us?" Jasper murmured. He was right. Unlike typical deer that bolt at the first sign of human presence, this one was deliberately observing us. Its head rose above the underbrush at a height that seemed impossible for a normal deer. "Noah," I said quietly, "how tall would you say that thing is?" Noah squinted. "It's hard to tell from here, but that oak it's standing behind is one I know well. If its head is where I think it is, that deer has to be at least 7 feet at the shoulder." "That's impossible," Henry scoffed, but his voice lacked conviction. The deer continued to stare, unmoving. Then Henry, in a moment of either bravery or foolishness, stepped forward and made a soft clicking sound with his tongue, the kind you might use to call a dog. "Henry, what the hell?" I hissed. "It's not a freaking dog. I just want to see what it does," he replied, making the sound again. The deer's response was subtle but unmistakable. Its head tilted slightly, an almost human gesture of curiosity. Then, very deliberately, it stepped backward, disappearing behind the tree. We waited for it to emerge on the other side, but it never did. "Let's keep moving," Noah said, his earlier confidence noticeably diminished. No one argued. We continued toward the cabin at a quicker pace, each lost in thought. I found myself repeatedly glancing over my shoulder, unable to shake the feeling that we were being followed. The familiar outline of the cabin was a welcome sight as we emerged from the tree line. The building seemed somehow smaller and more vulnerable than it had earlier, dwarfed by the surrounding forest that now took on a more oppressive quality in the fading light. "I'll get the fire going," Noah announced, heading for the stone fire pit in front of the cabin. "We should cook those fish before they spoil." While Noah busied himself with the fire, Henry lit another cigarette and settled into one of the porch chairs. Jasper and I decided to pass the time with a little competition. "Bet I can stick this tomahawk in that dead pine over there," Jasper challenged, retrieving a small throwing axe from his bag. "You're on," I replied, grateful for the distraction. "Loser cooks dinner." The dead pine stood about 15 feet away, its bark gray and peeling. Jasper took the first throw, the tomahawk rotating once before striking the tree with a satisfying thunk, burying itself an inch deep. "Your turn," he grinned, retrieving the axe. Our competition continued as the sky darkened and Noah's fire grew stronger. The physical activity helped ease the tension that had built during our encounter in the forest, though I noticed we all frequently glanced toward the tree line. By the time the fire was properly blazing, Jasper had won our contest by 2 throws. "Hope you're ready to cook," he teased as I conceded defeat. The evening progressed pleasantly enough. We grilled the trout along with some hot dogs, cracked open beers, and tried to recapture our earlier enthusiasm for the trip. As darkness fully enveloped the forest, the fire became our center of gravity, its warm light creating a small circle of safety against the pressing blackness beyond. "So, about that deer," Henry said after his first beer, voicing what we'd all been thinking about. "That was weird, right?" "Definitely not normal behavior," Noah agreed, Deer don't typically stand their ground like that, especially not with 4 humans present. Forget the behavior, Jasper interjected. Did you see the size of it? I've been hunting since I was 12, and I've never seen a whitetail that big. Noah nodded solemnly. When it was standing behind that oak, its head was almost level with that broken branch. That would put it at the size of a large horse, maybe bigger. Could it have been an elk? I suggested, searching for a rational explanation. They get pretty big. No elk in this part of Michigan, Noah replied. Not for decades. We fell silent, each contemplating the anomaly we'd witnessed. The fire crackled, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. From somewhere deep in the forest came the haunting call of an owl. My dad used to tell stories, Noah said finally, his voice low. Old hunters' tales about strange things in these woods. I always thought they were just stories meant to keep me from wandering too far. What kind of stories? Henry asked, leaning forward. Noah shrugged, suddenly uncomfortable. Just old folklore. Every forest has them. Native American legends, settler superstitions, that sort of thing. About deer? Jasper pressed. About things that use familiar shapes to hide their true nature, Noah replied cryptically. Look, it was probably just an unusually large buck, maybe with some genetic mutation. Nothing supernatural. The conversation drifted to other topics after that, but an undercurrent of unease remained. None of us ventured far from the fire, and we all agreed to turn in relatively early. By midnight, we had doused the fire and retreated to the safety of the cabin, securing the door behind us. Sleep came surprisingly easy despite the day's unsettling encounter. The physical exertion of fishing and the calming effect of a few beers likely contributed to my quick descent into unconsciousness. I was assigned one of the bottom bunks in the main bedroom, with Jasper above me and Noah and Henry in the second bedroom. I don't know how long I slept before the sound penetrated my dreams. At first, it incorporated itself into my subconscious, a distant calling that my dreaming mind attributed to someone shouting my name. But as consciousness gradually returned, the sound resolved into something else entirely. It was a buck call, the distinctive grunting sound male deer make during rutting season. Even in my groggy state, 2 things immediately struck me as wrong. It was June, not rutting season, and the sound was somehow distorted, deeper and more resonant than any deer call I'd ever heard. I lay perfectly still, straining my ears. The cabin was silent, except for Jasper's steady breathing above me. The call came again, closer this time. It seemed to originate from just beyond the cabin walls, a low, guttural sound that bore only a passing resemblance to a normal deer vocalization. Carefully, I slipped from my bunk and moved to the window. The night was clear, moonlight bathing the clearing in a ghostly blue glow. I scanned the tree line, expecting to see nothing. That's when I saw it. At the edge of the clearing stood a figure. In the moonlight, its silhouette was unmistakable, the general shape of a deer, but wrong in fundamental ways. It stood upright on 2 legs, its proportions disturbingly human-like, despite the distinctly cervine head. Even from a distance, I could see that its antlers were massive, extending outward and upward like gnarled branches. Fear cemented me in place as the creature took a deliberate step forward, then another, emerging fully from the tree line. Its movement was fluid, yet unnatural, a bipedal gait that no deer should possess. As it approached the cabin, I shrank back from the window, heart hammering against my ribs. The creature stopped about 20 yards from the cabin, raised its head, and emitted that terrible approximation of a buck call again. Then it turned its head directly toward my window. I dropped to the floor, pressing my back against the wall beneath the window. Seconds stretched into an eternity as I fought to control my breathing, certain that any sound would betray my presence. The floorboards outside my window creaked. Something large was moving along the side of the cabin, its weight causing the old wood to protest. I remained frozen, listening to its progress until the sound stopped directly outside my window. Against every instinct for self-preservation, I slowly raised myself just enough to peer over the windowsill. The face that greeted me would haunt my nightmares for years to come. It was, at first glance, the head of a white-tailed buck. But observed closely, the wrongness of it became apparent. The eyes were too forward-facing, too intelligent. The mouth, partially open as it exhaled cloudy breath against the glass, contained teeth that no herbivore should possess. Sharp, almost canine in appearance. The creature's head nearly reached the top of the window, which I knew to be over 7 feet from the ground. Its antlers extended beyond, scraping softly against the cabin's wooden exterior. We stared at each other through the glass, separated by mere inches. Its eyes reflected the moonlight with an unnatural amber glow. There was intelligence in that gaze, a calculating awareness that sent waves of primal terror through my body. Then, ever so slowly, it raised one limb. Not a hoof, but something closer to a hand, with elongated fingers ending in dark, curved claws. It pressed this appendage against the glass, as if testing its strength. I remained paralyzed, certain that any movement would provoke an attack. The creature continued its examination of the window, running its clawed hand along the frame, searching for weakness. Finding none, it lowered its appendage and took a step back. For a moment, I thought it was leaving. Instead, it tilted its head in that unsettlingly human manner, turned, and moved away from my window, heading toward the other side of the cabin, toward Henry and Noah's room. I don't know how long I remained frozen beneath the window. My mind raced with conflicting impulses: hide, warn my friends, find a weapon. Before I could decide on a course of action, a blood-curdling scream tore through the cabin. "Get away from me!" Henry's voice, pitched high with terror, galvanized me into action. I lurched to my feet as Jasper jolted awake above me. "What's happening?" he demanded, already scrambling down from his bunk. "Something's attacking Henry," I gasped, rushing toward the door. "The deer. It's not a deer." We burst into the hallway just as Noah emerged from the second bedroom, shotgun in hand. "It was at the window," he said, his face pale in the dim light. Reaching inside. Another scream from Henry propelled us into the bedroom. He was pressed against the far wall, his right arm clutched to his chest, blood seeping between his fingers. "It had my arm," he choked out. "Tried to pull me through the window." The window beside his bunk was open several inches. Henry had always preferred fresh air while sleeping. Outside, we could hear heavy movement, branches snapping under substantial weight. "We need to close and lock every entrance," Noah commanded, taking charge. "Windows, doors, everything now." We moved with desperate efficiency, securing each potential entry point. As I rushed to lock the front door, a heavy impact shook the entire structure. Something large had slammed against the wall. "It's testing the cabin," Noah said grimly, checking the shotgun's chamber. "Looking for a way in." The distorted buck call sounded again, now directly outside the main room. It was followed by another impact, this one against the door. The wood creaked but held. "What the hell is that thing?" Jasper whispered, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. "I don't know," Noah admitted, positioning himself in the center of the room with the shotgun raised. "But it's not leaving." The attacks continued, methodical and determined. The creature circled the cabin, testing each wall, window, and door. Occasionally, we caught glimpses of it through the windows, always that impossible silhouette, part deer, part man, wholly terrifying. Henry sat at the kitchen table, his wounded arm now bandaged with a torn t-shirt. The cuts were deep but had mostly stopped bleeding. "It had claws," he said dully, staring at nothing. "And fingers, like hands but not hands." None of us knew how to respond to that. The siege continued for what felt like hours. The creature seemed tireless in its determination to find a way inside. We took turns watching the windows while Noah kept the shotgun trained on the most vulnerable points. "If it gets in," he said quietly during a momentary lull in the attacks, "aim for the chest. Even if it's not natural, it should still have vital organs." The implication hung heavy in the air. None of us had come on this trip expecting to fight for our lives. Around 3 a.m., the attack suddenly ceased. The forest fell silent, not even the normal nocturnal sounds penetrating the quiet. We remained vigilant, certain it was a trick, a lull designed to lower our guard. "Do you think it's gone?" Jasper finally asked after 30 minutes of silence. "I'm not counting on it," Noah replied, his knuckles white around the shotgun. "But maybe it's regrouping or hunting. Either way, we stay locked down until daylight." Dawn couldn't come fast enough. First light arrived with agonizing slowness. None of us had slept, our nerves frayed by the night's ordeal. As sunlight gradually filtered through the windows, we remained huddled in the main room, waiting for full daybreak before considering our next move. "I need to see outside," Noah finally said as the sun cleared the eastern tree line. "We need to know what we're dealing with." With the shotgun at the ready, he cautiously approached the front window. The rest of us hung back, prepared to barricade ourselves in the bedrooms if necessary. "I don't see anything moving," Noah reported after scanning the clearing. "But there's evidence." "What kind of evidence?" I asked, dreading the answer. Noah didn't respond immediately. Instead, he moved to each window methodically, surveying the area around the cabin. His expression grew increasingly troubled. "It's safe to go out," he announced finally. "At least I think it is. But you need to see this for yourselves." We carefully unbarricaded the front door. Noah exited first, shotgun raised, while the rest of us followed cautiously. The morning air was crisp and clean, belying the horror of the previous night. The damage to the cabin was immediately apparent. Deep gouges marked the walls where the creature had attacked, splintered wood hanging in strips. The front door showed significant damage, the frame partially separated from the wall. But it was the ground around the cabin that truly confirmed our encounter. Footprints circled the entire structure. Not the typical cloven hoofprints of a deer, but something far more disturbing. They were larger than a man's foot, with a hybrid quality that defied easy description. The front portion resembled a hoof, but the rear splayed out into something almost hand-like, with distinct digit impressions. "These aren't deer tracks," Jasper stated the obvious, kneeling to examine one particularly clear impression. "Not bear or mountain lion either." "Look at the size," I added, placing my open hand next to one print. My entire hand fit easily within its perimeter. Noah had moved to examine the exterior wall beneath Henry's window. "There's blood here," he noted grimly, "and hair caught in the wood." We gathered around. Snagged in the splintered siding were several coarse hairs, too long and thick for a deer, more similar to human hair but with an unusual reddish-brown coloration. "There's something else," Noah said, his voice strained. He pointed upward. On the cabin's roof lay the carcass of a deer, a young doe, its body broken and mangled. But it wasn't the dead animal itself that caused us to recoil in horror. It was the manner of its demise. The doe's chest cavity had been torn open, ribs splayed outward, its heart and liver conspicuously absent. "It was feeding," Henry whispered, clutching his bandaged arm tighter. "Like it was leaving us a message." No one disputed his interpretation. Our examination continued with growing dread. The creature had circled the cabin dozens of times during the night, its tracks indicating a methodical search for entry points. In some places, the ground was torn up where it had apparently stood in place, possibly listening or planning its next move. "We need to leave," I said finally, voicing what we were all thinking. "Now. Today." No one argued. We returned to the cabin and began packing with urgent efficiency, each of us processing the impossible evidence we'd witnessed. The previous night, fear and darkness had allowed for potential misinterpretation. But in the clear light of day, the reality was undeniable. We had encountered something that should not exist. We were packed and ready to depart within 30 minutes. Noah insisted on taking photos of the evidence, the tracks, claw marks, and even, reluctantly, the mutilated doe on the roof. "For my father," he explained. "He needs to know what's happening here." The drive out of the forest was tense, each of us starting at shadows among the trees. I took the wheel, Noah riding shotgun with his actual shotgun across his lap. Henry and Jasper sat in the back, scanning the forest on either side of the narrow access road. "What do you think it was?" Jasper finally asked, breaking the heavy silence. No one answered immediately. The question demanded acknowledgement of something beyond our understanding of the natural world. "My grandfather used to tell stories," Noah said eventually, his eyes never leaving the tree line. "He was half Ojibwe. Said these forests have always had guardians, spirits that protect the land from those who would harm it." "We weren't harming anything," Henry protested, his voice hoarse. "Some of the stories weren't about protection," Noah continued. "Some were warnings about things that had changed, corrupted, things that started as one creature but became something else." The implication hung in the air as we continued our slow progress toward the main road. When we finally reached the highway, the relief was palpable, as if we'd crossed an invisible boundary beyond which normal rules of reality were restored. We stopped at a diner in the nearest town, each ordering coffee more for the comfort of normality than actual thirst. We agreed on a story for Henry's arm, a fishing accident, a hook gone astray, before seeking medical attention at the local clinic. The doctor who treated Henry's wound frowned at the jagged tears. "This doesn't look like any fishing injury I've seen," she remarked, but didn't press the issue when we maintained our story. The long drive home was subdued. We tried discussing what had happened, attempting to rationalize our experience, but the conversation inevitably circled back to the undeniable evidence of our senses. "Maybe it was some kind of mutation," Jasper suggested. "Radiation or chemical contamination could cause deformities." "Deformities don't explain intelligence," I countered. "That thing was hunting us deliberately. It was thinking." In the weeks that followed, we struggled to readjust to normal life. I found myself startling at unexpected movements glimpsed from the corner of my eye. Shadows took on threatening dimensions. Sleep became elusive, my dreams plagued by antlered silhouettes and amber eyes. Noah contacted his father about the incident. The older man visited the cabin himself, returning with troubling reports of more tracks, more signs of the creature's presence. He closed up the property indefinitely. Henry was the most affected. The physical wounds healed, leaving 3 parallel scars along his forearm, but the psychological damage ran deeper. He developed a pathological fear of forests and would cross the street to avoid even ornamental deer statues. The medication his therapist prescribed helped with the anxiety, but couldn't erase the memory. Jasper and Noah returned to the area once, a year later, during daylight hours and heavily armed. They didn't stay overnight, but reported finding more evidence: deer carcasses with surgical precision to the wounds, unusual tracks, and a crude structure of branches high in the trees that resembled no known animal nest. As for me, I've never returned. I can't. The rational part of my mind has constructed various explanations over the years. A deformed predator, perhaps a bear with genetic abnormalities, or even a human psychopath using animal disguise to terrorize intruders. But in my heart, I know the truth. There are things in this world that exist in the boundaries between classification, things that defy our comfortable categorizations, things that watch and wait in the ancient forests, wearing familiar shapes that disguise their true nature. I still fish and occasionally camp, but only in open spaces where visibility extends in all directions. I never venture into dense forests anymore, especially not as daylight wanes. And I never, under any circumstances, approach deer that stand their ground when humans appear. Some nights, when the wind blows from the north carrying the scent of pine and earth, I find myself checking the locks on my doors and windows. I draw the curtains tight and turn up the television to drown out any sounds from outside. Because deep down, I know that what we encountered wasn't confined to those woods. It's still out there, watching, waiting. And I can't escape the terrible certainty that someday, somehow, I'll look up to find those amber eyes staring at me through a window once again. My right hand grips the worn leather steering wheel. My left arm rests on the open window, catching the cool Montana air. 20 years on these highways have etched the road maps into my skin like permanent ink. The name's Hank Cosgrove, former Army grunt turned long-haul trucker, and this is the story of how I drove straight into hell on an autumn night in 1998. Most people who've never done this job think trucking is boring. They don't understand that the monotony becomes a meditation, that the endless ribbon of asphalt becomes a confessional booth where a man faces his demons mile after lonely mile. I've hauled everything from baby formula to caskets across 48 states, weathered blizzards that turned the world white, and nursed my rig through desert heat that could fry an egg on the hood. But nothing prepared me for what happened on October 3rd, 1998. The job seemed routine. Farm equipment delivery to Absuroki, Montana, one of those dots on the map that most GPS systems don't even acknowledge. The dispatcher had warned me about construction on the main route, but assured me the detour was well marked. Like most things dispatchers tell you, this was a half-truth at best. I was making good time until about 4 in the afternoon when I hit the detour signs. Orange cones funneled me onto a narrow 2-lane road that twisted through dense pine forest. The GPS started going haywire, the automated voice stammering, recalculating every few minutes before finally giving up altogether. Classic technology. Works fine until you actually need it. The October sun was already making its early retreat, casting long shadows across the road as I consulted my paper map. The trouble with back roads in Montana is they all look the same. Endless trees, occasional clearings, and not a landmark in sight that matches anything on a map. I'd been down plenty of roads like this before, but something about this one felt different, like the forest was watching me pass through. By 6 o'clock, dusk had settled in, and the temperature dropped sharply. I flicked on the high beams, illuminating a narrow tunnel through the pines. My rig's engine was the only sound for miles, a mechanical heartbeat in the wilderness. That's when I first noticed something wasn't right. The road signs had stopped appearing altogether. No mile markers, no town indicators, not even those little reflective arrows that warn about sharp curves. It was as if I'd slipped off the edge of the map into uncharted territory. I pulled into a small clearing to consult the map again and stretch my legs. The moment I killed the engine, the silence crashed down like a physical weight. No distant traffic, no airplanes overhead, not even the usual forest sounds. Just a vacuum of noise that made my ears ring. 20 years on the road teaches you that silence like that isn't natural. The stars emerged overhead, brilliant and cold against the darkening sky. Montana's big sky country living up to its name, with constellations I normally couldn't see through city light pollution. I took a leak at the edge of the clearing, watching my breath cloud in the chilly air. That's when I heard it, the snap of a twig, followed by the soft crunch of leaves. Not the random sounds of forest creatures, but the deliberate movement of something large trying to move quietly. Hello? My voice sounded thin in the vast silence. No response came, but I could feel eyes on me, watching from the tree line. I zipped up quickly and hustled back to the cab, locking the doors behind me, something I rarely did on rural routes. as the diesel engine rumbled back to life. I caught movement in my side mirror, just a shadow shifting among shadows, there and gone so quickly I might have imagined it. Back on the road, I tried the CB radio. Breaker 19, this is Long Haul Hank. Anybody out there know how to get to Route 87 from the backcountry near Elkhorn Ridge? Over. Nothing but static answered me. 10 minutes later, headlights appeared in my rearview mirror. Not unusual in itself. Other vehicles use these roads, but something about the timing made my neck prickle. The vehicle kept a consistent distance, not trying to pass despite the occasional straightaways where overtaking would have been possible. I squinted at the mirror, trying to make out the vehicle. A pickup truck, that much was clear from the height of the headlights. As it drew slightly closer on a curve, I could see it was an older model Ford, dark-colored, with a single occupant behind the wheel. Another 20 minutes passed with the Ford maintaining that same distance. Too close to be coincidence, too far to make out the driver. I took a random turn onto an even smaller road, hoping it would lead back to civilization, or at least confirm whether I was being followed. The Ford turned too. My palms began to sweat against the steering wheel. In 2 decades of trucking, I'd had my share of road rage incidents, parking lot confrontations, and late-night weirdos at truck stops. But this felt different. This felt like being hunted. I took another turn, then another, each road narrower than the last. The Ford stayed with me through every twist and turn like we were connected by an invisible tether. The CB radio suddenly crackled to life, startling me. Through the static, I caught fragments of a conversation between other truckers, normal chatter about way stations and traffic conditions. Never had ordinary trucker talk sounded so comforting. Breaker 19, this is Long Haul Hank on back roads west of Absuroki. I've got a tail that won't quit. Anybody know if there's a gas station nearby? Over. After a long pause, a voice cut through the static. Long Haul, this is Night Ride. There's a petrol station about 10 miles ahead if you're on County Road 23. Can't miss it. Only lights for 20 miles. What kind of tail we talking about? Over. Ford pickup, older model. Been following me for about an hour now. Probably nothing, but it's got my hackles up. Over. Roger that, Hank. Probably just a local taking the same route. But if it makes you feel better, I'm heading that way myself. About 30 minutes out. Over. Appreciate that, Night Ride. I'll check in when I hit the Petro. Over and out. The promise of another trucker nearby and a gas station ahead eased my tension somewhat. The Ford was still there, maintaining that same eerie distance, neither closing in nor falling back. Zero 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 zero. A few minutes later, I spotted a faint glow on the horizon, the fluorescent lights of the promised gas station cutting through the darkness. As I approached, I could see it wasn't a Petro as Night Ride had said, but some local place called Pine Ridge Gas and Grocery. It looked like it had been built in the 70s and not updated since, with 2 ancient pumps out front and a small convenience store with flickering lights. I pulled in under the harsh fluorescence, positioning my truck so I could keep an eye on the road. The Ford slowed as it approached, then turned into the station and parked away from the pumps, near the edge of the lot where the light barely reached. My throat went dry as I watched the driver's door. It remained closed, but I could feel someone watching me from behind the windshield. I climbed down from my cab, legs stiff from hours of driving, and headed for the store. As the door chimed above my head, I glanced back at the Ford one last time. The driver's side door was opening. The fluorescent lights inside the Pine Ridge Gas and Grocery buzzed like angry wasps, casting a sickly pallor over the dusty shelves. Behind the counter, a lanky kid with acne-scarred cheeks and dull eyes looked up from a dog-eared paperback. His name tag read, Todd. Evening, he drawled, marking his place in the book. Need fuel? Yeah, and some coffee if you got it. I positioned myself so I could see through the windows to the Ford outside. The driver had emerged and was standing beside his vehicle, a tall figure in the shadows. Todd followed my gaze. Something wrong, mister? I considered lying, then thought better of it. That truck's been following me for the last hour. Any chance you know who that is? Todd squinted through the smudged windows. Can't see much from here. A lot of folks pass through, especially since they started that construction on the highway. He reached under the counter and produced a thermos. Coffee's on the house. You look like you could use it. The coffee was bitter and burnt, but the caffeine was welcome. I took my time filling up, watching as the man from the Ford finally started walking toward the store. In the harsh overhead lights of the fuel island, I got my first good look at him. He stood well over 6 feet with broad shoulders and a rangy build. His beard was unkempt, streaked with gray, and his eyes were deeply recessed under the brim of a filthy baseball cap. His clothes, flannel shirt, worn jeans, work boots, would have been unremarkable on any rural road in America. But there was something wrong about the way he carried himself. Too stiff, too deliberate, like someone trying to remember how to act human. When our eyes met, he didn't look away. Most people will break eye contact after a second or two. It's instinctual. This man stared without blinking, his eyes reflecting the fluorescent lights like a predator's in the dark. Todd shuffled out to check on me, chattering nervously about their world-famous coffee and asking about my route. I responded automatically, my attention fixed on the approaching stranger. You know that guy? I asked Todd, nodding toward the man. Todd glanced over, then quickly looked away. Never seen him before. The kid's voice had changed, tightened. He was lying. Why don't you head back inside? I suggested. Todd didn't need to be told twice. He scurried back to the store, the door chiming as he disappeared inside. The man stopped a few yards away, just watching me. Up close, I could see dark stains on his clothing that might have been oil, or might have been something worse. Evening, I said, keeping my tone neutral. Can I help you with something? He remained silent, head tilted slightly as if listening to something I couldn't hear. His eyes never left mine, but I had the distinct impression he was seeing something else entirely. After an uncomfortable silence, I screwed the gas cap back on and returned the nozzle to the pump. Well, have a good night, I said, moving toward my truck. You're lost. His voice was like gravel being crushed underfoot, rough and unsettling. I paused. Just taking a detour. I know where I'm headed. A smile split his beard, revealing yellowed teeth. No, you don't. Inside the store, Todd was on the phone, his back to the window. The man followed my gaze and his smile widened. He won't help you. Nobody out here will. My hand instinctively went to my pocket where I kept my folding knife, a habit from my army days. Look, friend, I don't want any trouble. I'm just passing through. That's what they all say. He took a step closer. But there's no passing through. Not anymore. I'd dealt with my share of roadside weirdos, but something about this man made my skin crawl. It wasn't just his words or his appearance. It was the absolute conviction in his eyes, like he was stating simple facts about the weather. I climbed into my cab and locked the door, starting the engine with shaking hands. Through the windshield, I watched the man return to his Ford without taking his eyes off me. No rush in his movements, just the steady confidence of a predator that knows its prey can't escape. As I pulled back onto the road, the CB radio crackled again. Long haul Hank, this is Night Ride. You at that station yet? Over. I grabbed the handset, relief flooding through me at the sound of another human voice. Night Ride, this is Long Haul. Just leaving the station now. That Ford is still on me. Something's not right with the driver. Over. What's your 20 exactly? Over. I hesitated. That's the thing. I'm not sure anymore. Signs disappeared a while back. I'm on a 2-lane blacktop heading east from Pine Ridge Gas and Grocery. Over. Static hissed for several seconds before Night Ride's voice returned, softer now, almost hesitant. Hank, there ain't no Pine Ridge Gas and Grocery on any map I know. Are you sure about that name? Over. A cold weight settled in my stomach as I checked the rearview mirror. The Ford's headlights had appeared behind me, keeping that same measured distance. Dead sure. Just stop there. Talk to a kid named Todd. Over. Another long pause. Hank, listen careful. There was a Pine Ridge station about 15 years back. Burned down after the owner, guy named Todd Mercer, went nuts and killed his family. You need to get back to the main highway. Now. Over. I nearly dropped the handset. What are you saying? I just talked to this kid 5 minutes ago. But only static answered me. The CB had gone dead. The channel empty of all traffic like someone had thrown a switch. In the growing darkness, the Ford's headlights seemed to burn brighter, growing larger in my mirrors. I pressed the accelerator, pushing my rig harder than was safe on these winding roads. The speedometer crept up, 55, 60, 65, the trailer swaying dangerously behind me on the curves. The road stretched ahead, an endless black ribbon through the pines. I tried the CB again, cycling through all channels, but found nothing but static. My cell phone showed no service. Not that I expected any out here. After 20 minutes of hard driving, I spotted a crossroads ahead with an actual street sign, the first I'd seen in hours. I slowed just enough to make the turn, hoping to lose my pursuer or at least find my way back to civilization. The Ford's headlights disappeared from my mirrors, and for a moment, I thought I'd lost him. Then I rounded a bend and nearly drove off the road in shock. The Ford was there, parked across the road, blocking my path. The man stood in front of it, shotgun raised to his shoulder, aimed directly at my windshield. I slammed on the brakes, the trailer jackknifing slightly behind me. There was nowhere to go. Dense forest pressed in on both sides, too tight to maneuver an 18-wheeler through. The man approached, shotgun steady, his face now hidden in shadow. "Get out!" he barked, his voice carrying clearly through the night air. My options were limited. I could try to run him down, but a shotgun blast through the windshield would end that plan quickly. I could try to reverse, but the jackknife trailer made that impossible without taking time to straighten out. Time he wouldn't give me. Slowly, I shut off the engine and raised my hands. "Take it easy, buddy. No need for that. Keys, now." He gestured with the shotgun. I tossed the keys onto the ground at his feet. He scooped them up without taking his eyes or his aim off me, then motioned for me to exit the truck. As I climbed down, the cold night air hit me like a physical blow. We were miles from anywhere, with no witnesses and no help coming. Whatever this man wanted, I was on my own. He circled around me, keeping the shotgun leveled at my chest, and began searching through my cab. After a few minutes, he emerged with my logbook and the shipping manifest. "Absuroki," he read aloud, his voice flat. "You're making a delivery to Absuroki." "That's right," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Farm equipment. They're expecting it tomorrow." He laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "No, they're not." He tossed the papers aside. "Nobody's expecting anything in Absuroki, not anymore." "What do you want?" I asked, struggling to understand what was happening. "If it's money..." "I want you to understand." He cut me off. "I want you to know what happens to people who take the wrong turn." He gestured toward the woods with the shotgun. "Start walking. Look, if this is about territory or something, I'm just passing through. I don't even know where I am exactly." His eyes narrowed. "You're exactly where you're supposed to be. Now walk." With the shotgun at my back, I had no choice. I started into the forest, the darkness swallowing me as we moved away from the headlights. The man followed closely, the barrel of the shotgun occasionally prodding between my shoulder blades when I slowed. We walked for what felt like an hour, the forest growing denser, the night darker. Finally, we emerged into another clearing, and what I saw there froze the blood in my veins. Trucks. Dozens of them. Abandoned 18-wheelers lined up in neat rows. Some new, some so old they were more rust than metal. In the moonlight, I could make out different company logos, different states of decay. Some looked like they'd been there for decades. "What is this place?" I whispered, though I already knew the answer on some primal level. The man's voice came from just behind my ear, his breath hot on my neck. "It's where lost drivers end up. Welcome to Absuroki, Hank. Your final delivery. They say when you're about to die, your life flashes before your eyes. That's bullshit. What flashes before your eyes are all the mistakes that led you to that moment. The wrong turns, the bad decisions, the moments you should have trusted your gut but didn't. Standing in that clearing of abandoned trucks, I saw my mistake clearly. I should have turned around the moment I hit that detour. I should have ignored the dispatcher and taken the longer route. I should have trusted the unease that had been crawling up my spine since sunset. But those realizations were worthless now. "Move," the man ordered, shoving me toward the nearest truck, an ancient Peterbilt with 70s styling and Minnesota plates so rusted I could barely make out the numbers. As we got closer, I noticed something that made my stomach lurch. There was a dark stain on the driver's side door, spreading down from the window like something had leaked from inside. It looked horribly like dried blood. "Open it," he commanded, gesturing with the shotgun. My hands trembled as I reached for the door handle. It was stiff with disuse but gave way with a protesting groan of metal. The smell hit me immediately, the unmistakable copper-sweet stench of old blood and decay. The cab's interior was dark, but the moonlight revealed enough. The seat and steering wheel were covered in dark stains, and something that might once have been human slumped against the passenger door, now little more than leathery skin stretched over bone. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. "Jesus Christ." The man caught me by the collar, spinning me around to face the field of trucks. "Every driver who takes the wrong turn ends up here. Some try to run, some try to fight." His grip tightened. "It doesn't matter what they do, this is where the road ends for all of them." My mind raced, desperately searching for a way out. If I could just get back to my truck, I might have a chance. "Why?" I managed to ask. "Why are you doing this?" He tilted his head, studying me like I was a curious insect. "I'm not doing anything. The road chooses who stays and who goes. I'm just the caretaker." "Caretaker of what? A graveyard of trucks?" The words seemed to amuse him. "More than trucks die here, Hank. This place has been hungry for a long time. It takes the drivers, the cargo, even the memory of them from the world outside." He swept his arm in a wide gesture. "Notice anything about these trucks? No search parties, no police tape. Once you're here, it's like you never existed anywhere else." A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the night air. I thought about Night Ride on the CB and his warning about the gas station that had burned down 15 years ago. About Todd, the attendant who couldn't possibly be real. The man seemed to read my thoughts. "Starting to understand now, aren't you? The detour wasn't on any map. The gas station doesn't exist. Even Absuroki isn't a real place. Not anymore." "That's impossible," I said. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew they were hollow. I'd been driving these roads for 20 years, and I'd never heard of Absuroki until this job came up. "Check your manifest again," he suggested with a knowing smile. "Look at the delivery address." I thought back to the paperwork I'd glanced at days ago when taking the job. Had there even been a street address? I couldn't remember seeing one, just the town name and a loading dock number. While my mind grappled with this, I noticed something the man had apparently forgotten. He'd lowered the shotgun slightly as he talked, the barrel now pointing at the ground rather than my chest. 20 years ago, in the Army, They'd trained us for moments like this. How to disarm an opponent, how to create an opening, how to survive. The training was rusty, but it was still there, buried under 2 decades of civilian life. I lunged forward without warning, driving my shoulder into his midsection while grabbing for the shotgun. He was stronger than he looked, and his finger tightened on the trigger as we struggled. The blast tore through the night, the shot going wide into the trees. We fell to the ground, rolling in the dirt, both fighting for control of the weapon, his face contorted with rage, all pretense of calm disappearing. "You can't leave," he snarled, spittle flying from his lips. "Nobody leaves." I smashed my forehead into his nose, feeling it crunch beneath the impact. Blood sprayed, black in the moonlight, but his grip on the shotgun didn't loosen. He brought his knee up into my groin, and pain exploded through my body, momentarily paralyzing me. He used the advantage to roll on top, pinning me with his weight while raising the shotgun like a club. I got my arm up just in time to block the blow, the stock glancing off my forearm instead of crushing my skull. The pain was immediate and intense. The bone might be fractured, but at least I was still conscious. I drove my other fist into his throat, a desperate move that connected solidly. He gagged, his grip on the shotgun faltering for just an instant. It was enough. I wrenched the weapon from his hands and scrambled away, putting distance between us as I rose to my feet. He recovered quickly, pulling a long hunting knife from his belt. "Do you think you're the first to fight back?" he wheezed, his damaged throat affecting his speech. "They all try something. It never works." I had the shotgun now, but I'd never been comfortable with firearms even during my service. Still, the solid weight of it in my hands gave me courage. "Stay back," I warned, raising it to my shoulder. He laughed that broken glass laugh again. "Go ahead, pull the trigger, see what happens." Something in his confidence made me hesitate. I ejected the shell and checked the chamber. Empty. I pumped it again, and another spent shell ejected. The gun was fully unloaded except for the round he'd fired during our struggle. His grin widened. "Like I said, I'm just the caretaker. I don't need weapons to keep you here." I threw the useless shotgun aside and backed away, looking for anything I could use as a weapon or a path of escape. The clearing was surrounded by dense forest on all sides except for the narrow track we'd come in on. Then I heard it. The sound of an engine starting. One of the trucks in the clearing, a newer model Kenworth, rumbled to life, its headlights cutting through the darkness. No one was in the cab. Another engine started, then another. Around the clearing, trucks began awakening, their lights illuminating, diesel engines growling like hungry beasts. The man stood calmly in the middle of it all, watching me with those unblinking eyes. "You see," he said softly, barely audible over the engines. "This place has its own rules, its own hunger." I ran. Blind panic drove me into the trees, away from the clearing and its impossible horrors. Branches whipped at my face, roots threatened to trip me, but I kept moving. Behind me, I heard the man's laughter, and worse, the sound of multiple engines revving, of massive tires beginning to roll. They were coming after me. The empty trucks were hunting me through the forest. I crashed through the underbrush, my lungs burning, my fractured arm throbbing with each heartbeat. The forest seemed to close in around me, branches reaching like grasping fingers, roots rising to snare my feet. Through the trees, I caught glimpses of headlights moving in impossible ways, weaving between trunks too narrow for any vehicle to pass. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, I broke through the tree line and found myself back on the road. My road, where this nightmare had begun. In the distance, I could see my truck, still jackknifed across the pavement, its hazard lights blinking steadily in the night. Hope surged through me. If I could reach it, start it somehow without the keys, maybe I could escape this place. I sprinted down the road, each footfall bringing me closer to salvation. Behind me, the forest seemed to exhale, a collective sigh of branches and leaves that sent a cold wave of air across my back. The sound of engines grew louder, and I risked a glance over my shoulder. They were emerging from the trees. Not just the man's Ford, but 3 of the trucks from the clearing, ghostly drivers visible behind their windshields, their faces hollow and rotted like the corpse I'd seen earlier. I ran harder than I'd ever run in my life, my focus narrowed to the singular goal of reaching my truck. 50 yards, 40, 30. The distance collapsed under my desperate sprint. When I reached the cab, I nearly sobbed with relief. Climbing up, I tried the door, locked, of course. I smashed my elbow through the side window, ignoring the glass that sliced into my skin, and reached through to unlock it from the inside. The pursuing vehicles were closing in, their headlights illuminating the interior of my cab as I frantically searched for any way to start the engine without keys. In the Army, I'd learned how to hotwire certain military vehicles, but a modern semi was another matter entirely. As I tore at the steering column, my hand brushed against something in the cup holder, a spare key. I'd forgotten I kept one hidden for emergencies, a habit I'd picked up years ago after locking myself out at a rest stop in Nevada. With shaking hands, I jammed the key into the ignition and turned. The engine roared to life, and I slammed the truck into gear, maneuvering to straighten out the trailer. In my side mirrors, I could see the Ford and the ghostly trucks bearing down on me, now only yards away. The trailer finally straightened, and I floored the accelerator. The truck lurched forward, slowly at first, then with gathering speed. The pursuing vehicles gained on me, the Ford pulling alongside my trailer. Through the passenger window, I could see the man keeping pace, his eyes locked on mine, his mouth moving as if speaking words I couldn't hear. Then he swerved sharply, his Ford slamming into the side of my cab. The impact nearly sent me off the road, but I held the wheel steady and maintained course. He fell back slightly, then accelerated again, clearly planning another ram. Behind him, the ghostly trucks were gaining, their rotting drivers leaning forward with anticipation. I pushed my rig to its limits, the engine screaming in protest as we thundered down the dark road. The Ford tried to pull alongside again, but this time I was ready. As he swerved toward me, I jerked the wheel in the opposite direction, then sharply back, using the trailer's momentum to slam into his smaller vehicle. The Ford spun out, careening into the ditch beside the road. In my mirrors, I saw it roll once, twice, before coming to rest on its roof, headlights still burning but pointing uselessly at the sky. The ghostly trucks slowed as they approached the wrecked Ford, circling it like wary predators. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I kept driving, pushing my rig harder than was safe, desperate to put distance between myself and that cursed place. For hours, I drove without stopping, taking every turn that seemed to lead toward civilization, away from the depths of the forest. The CB remained dead, my cell phone useless, and the few road signs I encountered seemed to contradict each other, as if the geography itself was shifting around me. As dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, I finally saw something that made my heart leap. A highway sign indicating Interstate 90 was ahead. I'd found my way back to the main road, back to the world I knew. But as I approached the intersection, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. The light looked strange, too golden, too perfect. The air had a stillness that didn't belong to the natural world. And then I saw it. The Pine Ridge Gas and Grocery, looking exactly as it had hours before, its fluorescent lights still flickering in the early morning light. Parked out front was a familiar Ford pickup, and leaning against the pump was the man, watching my approach with that same unblinking stare. I slammed on the brakes, the trailer fishtailing behind me. This was impossible. I'd seen the Ford crash. I'd driven for hours in the opposite direction. The man pushed off from the pump and began walking toward me, his movements unnaturally smooth. Behind him, the door to the gas station opened, and Todd stepped out, his face expressionless. I threw the truck into reverse, backing away from this impossible scene, then swung the wheel hard, executing a frantic three-point turn in the middle of the road. As I accelerated away, I glanced in my mirrors. The gas station was gone. The road behind me was empty. But in the tree line beside the road, I could see him standing perfectly still, watching me drive away. Dawn painted the sky in shades of fire as I drove, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, my eyes constantly checking the mirrors for any sign of pursuit. The fracture in my arm had swollen to twice its normal size, throbbing with each heartbeat. Glass cuts on my hands and face had crusted over with dried blood, and every muscle in my body screamed from the night's exertions. But I was alive. I was moving. And the road ahead seemed to be leading somewhere real. After another hour of driving, I crested a hill and saw a familiar sight. The interstate stretching across the landscape like a lifeline. Traffic moved along it, normal morning commuters and commercial vehicles going about their business, unaware of the nightmare that existed just miles away in the backwoods. I emerged onto the highway, the solid feel of well-maintained asphalt beneath my tires bringing a rush of relief so intense I nearly wept. My CB radio suddenly crackled to life, filled with the normal chatter of truckers discussing routes and weather conditions. My cell phone chimed with a series of delayed text messages, signal bars finally appearing on the screen. I was back in the world. But was I safe? The question haunted me as I pulled into the first truck stop I found, a bustling pilot with a crowded parking lot and a restaurant full of drivers hunched over plates of eggs and coffee. Normal. Mundane. Real. I parked and sat for a long moment, gathering my courage to step out of the cab. What if this was another illusion? What if I opened the door and found myself back in that clearing of abandoned trucks, the man waiting for me with his knowing smile? Eventually, necessity forced me to move. My arm needed medical attention, and I needed to contact my dispatcher to explain why I'd missed my delivery window. I climbed down carefully, half expecting the world to shift around me, but everything remained solid and ordinary. Inside the truck stop, I approached the counter and asked the cashier where I was exactly. "Billings," she said, giving me an odd look. "You okay, mister? You look like you've been through the ringer." "Accident," I explained vaguely. "Is there a hospital nearby?" She gave me directions to the nearest emergency room, her concern evident as she took in my battered appearance. "Want me to call someone for you? Police or anything?" I shook my head. "Just need to make a few calls myself. Thanks." At a quiet booth in the corner of the restaurant, I dialed my dispatcher, Frank, dreading the conversation. Frank was a good guy, but he ran a tight ship and didn't tolerate missed deliveries. "Hank?" He sounded surprised to hear from me. "Where the hell have you been? I've been trying to reach you since yesterday afternoon." "Had some trouble on the detour route," I said, keeping it simple. "Got lost, then had an accident. I'm in Billings now, headed to the hospital to get checked out." Frank's tone softened slightly. "How bad is it? You okay to drive?" "Might have a broken arm. Truck's banged up but operational. Look, Frank, about that delivery to Absuroki." "To where?" Frank interrupted. My blood ran cold. "Absuroki, the farm equipment delivery." When he didn't respond, I added, "Check the manifest, job number 1998-273. I heard keyboard clicking on his end, then a long pause. "Hank, there's no delivery with that job number, and there's definitely no place called Absuroki on any of our routes." My free hand gripped the edge of the table, knuckles whitening. "Frank, I have the paperwork right here. I've been hauling this load for 3 days." "What load?" His confusion sounded genuine. "According to my system, your truck is empty. You were dead heading back from Seattle after dropping off that lumber shipment. No pickup scheduled until tomorrow in Fargo." I opened my mouth to argue, then closed it. Slowly, I set down the phone and walked back to my truck on unsteady legs. Opening the trailer doors, I found exactly what Frank had described. An empty cargo area, swept clean, with no sign of the farm equipment I'd been hauling. Back in the restaurant, I picked up the phone where Frank was still asking questions. "I need some time off," I said, cutting him short. "Family emergency. I'll call you in a few days." Before he could respond, I hung up and dialed another number. My old Army buddy, Mike, who now worked as a county records clerk in Montana. "Mike, it's Hank Cosgrove. I need a favor. Can you check if there's ever been a town called Absuroki in Montana? Or a gas station called Pine Ridge anywhere in the state?" Mike didn't ask why I needed to know, which was one of the reasons we'd stayed friends for 20 years. He just went quiet for a few minutes, then came back on the line. "No town by that name in any records, current or historical," he said. "As for Pine Ridge Gas and Grocery, there was one about 15 miles east of Elkhorn, burned down in '83 after the owner killed himself and his kid. Pretty grisly story, actually. They say." "Did the kid's name happen to be Todd?" I interrupted. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. "Yeah. How'd you know that?" I thanked him and hung up, my mind reeling. It was true, all of it. The gas station that shouldn't exist. The town that wasn't real. The manifest that had disappeared from both my trailer and Frank's records. At the hospital, I gave the doctors a simplified version of events. I'd been run off the road, fought with my attacker, and managed to escape. They set my fractured ulna, stitched up the deeper cuts, and prescribed painkillers that barely touched the edges of my fear. When they asked if I wanted to file a police report, I declined. What would I tell them? That I'd been hunted by a man who might not be human, on roads that didn't exist, delivering cargo to a town that had never been real? Instead, I checked into a motel on the outskirts of Billings, a shabby place that asked no questions when I paid cash for a week's stay. I needed time to think, to recover, to make sense of what had happened. The first night, exhaustion pulled me into a deep sleep despite my fear. I dreamed of the clearing and its field of abandoned trucks. But in the dream, I was looking out from behind the wheel of one of them, unable to move, watching as new victims were brought before me. I woke gasping, sheets soaked with sweat, the motel room spinning around me. For a disorienting moment, I thought I was back in my truck, still trapped on those endless back roads. The red glow of the alarm clock read 3:17 a.m., the dead hours of the night when the barrier between worlds feels thinnest. Something scratched at my door, a soft, persistent noise that might have been branches in the wind, except there were no trees near my room. I lay perfectly still, listening as the scratching moved from the door to the window, fingernails on glass, testing, seeking entry. "I know you're awake, Hank," a familiar voice called from outside, gravel rough and mocking. "You can't hide here. The road always finds a way back to you." I fumbled for the bedside lamp, clicking it on. The scratching stopped immediately. When I gathered my courage to peer through the curtains, the parking lot was empty except for my truck and a few other vehicles belonging to guests. But my truck was different. Even from the window, I could see that its color had changed slightly, darker, more like the Ford that had pursued me. And something was written in the dust on the driver's side door. Not over. I didn't sleep again that night. At first light, I checked out of the motel and hit the road, heading east toward the Dakotas, putting distance between myself and Montana. I told myself it was over, that I'd escaped whatever trap had been set for me in those backwoods. The miles rolled by, the landscape changing from mountains to plains, and gradually, my breathing slowed. The truck ran smoothly, the radio played normal songs, and the sky above was an ordinary, comforting blue. Other vehicles passed me or fell behind, their drivers giving me casual waves of acknowledgement. By nightfall, I'd crossed into South Dakota and found another motel, This one part of a national chain, brightly lit and busy with tourists. I slept without dreams, and when morning came, no messages waited for me in the dust on my truck. For 3 days, I drove without incident, zigzagging across the upper Midwest, taking main highways and avoiding back roads entirely. I called Frank and spun a story about a family illness that had cleared up sooner than expected, and he assigned me a simple load from Minneapolis to Chicago. The routine of the job began to settle over me again. The familiar rhythm of driving, the camaraderie of truck stops, the predictable challenges of traffic and weather. I began to think that maybe, just maybe, I had put Absuroki behind me for good. Then came the CB call that shattered my fragile peace. Breaker 19 for long haul Hank. Come in, Hank. Over. I froze, the handset halfway to my lips. No one had called me long haul in days. Not since. Long haul Hank, this is Night Ride. Remember me? Over. Night Ride. The trucker who had warned me about the gas station. The one who had disappeared from the CB when I needed him most. Against my better judgment, I keyed the mic. Night Ride, this is Hank. I remember you. Over. Glad you made it out, Hank. Not many do. Over. A chill ran through me. What do you know about that place? Over. Static filled the channel for a long moment before his voice returned. I know it's been taking drivers for decades. I know it makes people forget those it takes. And I know it's not finished with you yet. Over. How do you know all this? Over. Another pause, longer this time. Because I've been running from it for 30 years, Hank. Just like you're going to do now. It let you go for a reason. It's playing with you. Over. I glanced in my mirrors, suddenly aware of how empty the highway had become in the last few minutes. No cars behind me, none ahead, just an open road stretching to the horizon. What do I do? Over. Keep moving. Stay on main roads. Never drive at night if you can help it. And whatever you do, don't pick up hitchhikers, especially not ones who look like people you've seen before. Over. Before I could ask anything else, a truck appeared in my mirror. An old Peterbilt, similar to the one I'd seen in the clearing. It was gaining on me rapidly, its headlights too bright, too focused. Night Ride. There's a truck coming up fast behind me. Over. Nothing but static answered me. The CB had gone dead again. The Peterbilt was now right on my tail, close enough that I couldn't see its grille in my mirrors, just those blinding headlights. I accelerated, pushing well above the speed limit, but it matched my pace effortlessly. After several tense minutes, it suddenly swung out and passed me on the left. As it drew alongside, I got a clear view of the driver, a rotting corpse in a flannel shirt, its leathery face split in a grin that revealed blackened teeth. It raised one skeletal hand in a mocking wave. I blinked, and the driver transformed into the bearded man from the gas station, still grinning, still waving. Then the Peterbilt pulled ahead and disappeared around a bend in the road. When I rounded the same bend seconds later, the truck was gone. The highway stretched empty before me, but something had changed. The landscape was wrong. Too wild, too empty. The vegetation shifting from Midwestern prairie to dense Montana pine forest. A road sign appeared ahead. Absuroki, 50 miles. My hands tightened on the wheel as understanding dawned. It didn't matter how far I ran or what roads I took. Some part of me had never left that place. And now it was pulling me back, reeling me in like a fish on a line. The road narrowed, the pavement growing rough beneath my tires. The sky darkened unnaturally fast, stars appearing in a pattern I recognized from that first night in the clearing. In my rearview mirror, headlights appeared. Not just one pair, but dozens. A convoy of the damned coming to welcome me back. And ahead, just visible in the gathering gloom, was the flickering sign of the Pine Ridge Gas and Grocery. As I approached, I could see two figures waiting by the pumps. Todd, forever young, and the bearded man, forever patient. They watched my truck draw near, neither moving nor speaking, secure in the knowledge that I had nowhere else to go. I had one chance. One desperate, probably futile chance to break the cycle. Instead of slowing down, I pressed the accelerator to the floor. My truck roared in response, picking up speed as I aimed directly at the gas station. The bearded man's smile faltered for the first time as he realized my intention. He stepped forward, raising his hands as if to stop 18 tons of steel through sheer will. I closed my eyes as the impact came. They found my truck 3 days later, wrapped around a tree just off Interstate 90 near Sheridan, Wyoming. According to the accident report, I'd fallen asleep at the wheel and drifted off the road at nearly 80 miles per hour. The cab was crushed beyond recognition, the trailer split open like a tin can, spilling its contents across the forest floor. The contents that weren't supposed to exist, farm equipment bound for a town that wasn't real. By all rights, I should have died in that crash. The highway patrol officers who extracted me from the wreckage called it a miracle that I survived with only a concussion, 4 broken ribs, and a punctured lung. They said I'd been unconscious for nearly 72 hours, mumbling incoherently about trucks and roads that led nowhere. But I knew the truth. It wasn't luck that saved me. It was something much worse. I spent 3 weeks in the hospital, reconstructing my memories piece by piece. Some came back clean and sharp: the gas station, the man with the shotgun, the clearing full of abandoned trucks. Others remained hazy, dreamlike, as if my mind was trying to protect me from the full horror of what I'd experienced. The doctors talked about traumatic brain injury and post-concussion syndrome. They nodded sympathetically when I tried to explain about Absuroki and the bearded man, writing it off as confusion resulting from my injuries. No one mentioned the fact that my empty trailer had been full of cargo that shouldn't have existed. Frank visited me once, awkward and concerned. He spoke about insurance claims and disability benefits, carefully avoiding any mention of where I'd been or what I'd been hauling. When I pressed him about the delivery to Absuroki, he changed the subject, his eyes skittering away from mine like he was afraid of what he might see there. I was released on a Tuesday, a brisk autumn day with leaves skittering across the hospital parking lot. My brother Dave had flown in from Arizona to drive me back to my apartment in Idaho. We made small talk on the long drive. His kids, his job, the weather. Neither of us mentioning the elephant in the room. Until we hit the Montana border. "We could go around," Dave said suddenly, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Take the southern route through Wyoming. Add a few hours, but..." He trailed off, unable to articulate why we should avoid the direct route, but I understood. He'd been having dreams too. Dreams about back roads and gas stations that shouldn't exist. Dreams about his brother disappearing into the dark. "It's okay," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Let's stick to the interstate. It'll be fine." Dave nodded, but I noticed he checked the mirrors more frequently after that, his eyes darting nervously to each exit sign we passed. When night fell, he insisted on stopping at a well-lit chain hotel just off the highway, though we could have pushed on for several more hours. In my room that night, I stood at the window, watching the traffic flow past on the interstate, each set of headlights a reminder of the convoy that had pursued me through the darkness. In the parking lot below, our rental car sat undisturbed, ordinary and unremarkable. Unlike my truck, which remained impounded at a salvage yard near the crash site, too damaged to repair, but too valuable to scrap entirely. I'd arranged to have my personal belongings retrieved, but something held me back from claiming them. Some instinct warned me that those items, my logbook, my thermos, my dog-eared road atlas, might have been changed by their proximity to what happened. Then again, maybe I was the one who had changed. Dave and I completed the journey without incident, sticking to main roads, driving only during daylight hours. My apartment welcomed me back with the stale air and accumulated dust of a place long uninhabited. Dave helped me settle in, stocked my fridge, and reluctantly returned to his own life after extracting numerous promises that I would call if I needed anything. For weeks, I barely left my apartment. My injuries provided a convenient excuse, but the truth was simpler. I was afraid. Afraid of roads and highways, afraid of the rumble of diesel engines, afraid of what might be waiting for me in the dark spaces between destinations. When the nightmares came, they followed a pattern. I would be driving, always driving, down endless back roads that twisted in impossible ways. Sometimes I was pursued. Sometimes I was the pursuer. Sometimes I was the man with the shotgun, leading other drivers into the clearing of abandoned trucks. And always, I woke gasping at precisely 3:17 a.m., the moment when the barrier between worlds was thinnest. After 2 months of recovery, my savings had dwindled to nearly nothing. The insurance settlement from the accident covered my medical bills, but little else. I needed to work, but the thought of climbing back into a truck's cab made my hands shake and my heart race. I found a job at a local warehouse, loading and unloading the very trucks I used to drive. The irony wasn't lost on me, but at least it kept me in one place, with no expectations of venturing onto the open road. It was there, on a bitter December morning, that I saw him again, the bearded man from the gas station. He was driving one of the delivery trucks, his face partially hidden by that same dirty baseball cap, but I would have recognized him anywhere. Our eyes met across the loading dock, and he smiled that knowing smile before pulling away, his truck disappearing into the morning traffic. I quit that afternoon. My next job was at a call center, as far removed from transportation as I could get. I worked nights, partly because the pay was better, partly because it meant I was awake during those vulnerable hours when the nightmares were strongest. For nearly a year, I maintained this nocturnal existence, slowly rebuilding my life within carefully constructed boundaries. I avoided highways. I never drove after dark. I took taxis rather than buses when possible. And gradually, the nightmares began to fade, appearing only occasionally rather than nightly. I might have convinced myself it was over if not for the postcards. The first arrived on the anniversary of the accident, a generic tourist card showing Pine Ridge National Forest. No message, no return address, postmarked from a town I'd never heard of in western Montana. The second came a month later, another forest scene, this one featuring an empty clearing surrounded by pines. Similar to the one where I'd seen the abandoned trucks, but not quite the same. This card had a message. Still keeping your spot warm. T. Todd. The gas station attendant who shouldn't have existed. The boy who had died in 1983. The postcards continued arriving at irregular intervals, each featuring locations increasingly familiar to me. A gas station similar to Pine Ridge. A stretch of highway that resembled the one where I'd crashed. A truck stop where the patrons all had their backs to the camera, their faces hidden. I kept them in a shoebox under my bed, unable to throw them away, yet unwilling to look at them for long. Each new arrival set my recovery back weeks, plunging me into paranoia and insomnia. After the sixth postcard, this one showing my apartment building with a red X marked over my window, I decided I couldn't stay. I packed a single bag, emptied my bank account, and left Idaho without telling anyone where I was going. I drifted for months, taking odd jobs in small towns across the Northwest, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots or receive mail. I avoided truck stops and highways, taking meandering local routes between destinations, always vigilant for signs that I was being followed. It was during this nomadic period that I began researching similar incidents, disappearances along remote highways, truckers who vanished mid-route only to reappear days or weeks later with no memory of where they'd been, reports of ghost towns that appeared on no maps but were occasionally encountered by lost travelers. The patterns were too consistent to be coincidence. The back roads of America were haunted by places like Absuroki, phantom locations that existed in the cracks between reality, trapping unwary travelers, and sometimes rarely releasing them changed. I started keeping a journal, documenting my experiences and the stories I gathered. At first, it was therapeutic, a way to organize my thoughts and convince myself I wasn't crazy. Later, it became something more. A warning. A map. A guide for others who might find themselves on roads that lead nowhere. In a small library in northern Washington, I met Karen, a local historian researching disappearances along the old logging roads. We compared notes, finding disturbing similarities between my experience and the cases she'd documented dating back to the 1920s. "It's like there are thin spots," she explained, spreading a map across the table between us. "Places where the normal world and something else brush against each other. Most are temporary, appearing and disappearing at random, but some are permanent, anchored to locations with violent histories. Like the Pine Ridge Gas and Grocery," I suggested. She nodded. "Exactly. A murder-suicide creates a wound in reality. Over time, that wound festers, drawing in similar energies, similar tragedies." She tapped a section of the map where several disappearances had been marked. "This whole region is a hotspot. Something about the geography, maybe, or the history?" "What about the people?" I asked. "The ones who stay there, like the man with the shotgun? Or Todd?" Karen hesitated, her finger tracing circles on the map. "I think they're caught between worlds. Not fully there, not fully here. Guardians or prisoners, maybe both. And the trucks? The ones that drove themselves? Echoes," she said softly. "Residual energy from the vehicles and their drivers replaying the moment of crossing over. Like ghosts, but with more purpose." It made as much sense as anything else I'd considered. We spent weeks correlating her historical research with my first-hand experience, creating a comprehensive theory of what I'd encountered. Karen wanted to publish our findings as an academic paper. I refused. Publicizing the existence of places like Absuroki would only draw more people to them, creating more victims, more echoes, more thin spots between worlds. Instead, I did something riskier. I went back. Not to Montana specifically, but to the road. I bought a used pickup, not a Ford, and began retracing the routes where disappearances had occurred, looking for patterns, for warnings, for ways to identify thin spots before they could trap the unwary. I never drove at night. I avoided unmarked detours. I carried specialized equipment, electromagnetic field detectors, thermometers, barometers, to measure environmental changes that might indicate a crossing point. And I documented everything, building on the journal I'd started months earlier. For 2 years, I traveled this way, a ghost hunter of sorts, though the ghosts I sought were places rather than people. I found dozens of thin spots across the Northwest, marking them on my maps, warning locals when possible, sometimes intervening directly when I saw travelers about to take dangerous turns. The postcards stopped coming. Whether because I was mobile or because whoever, whatever, sent them had lost interest, I couldn't say. The nightmares continued, but less frequently, and I learned to manage them with meditation techniques Karen had taught me. I was in eastern Oregon when I found it again. Not Absuroki itself, but another place like it. A small gas station on a forgotten highway with a single attendant whose eyes reflected the light wrongly. I drove past without stopping, noting its location in my journal, warning the next town about the dangerous road conditions in that area. That night, in a motel 50 miles away, I woke at exactly 3:17 a.m. Outside my window, an old Ford pickup was idling, its engine a low growl in the pre-dawn darkness. The bearded man leaned against its hood, smoking a cigarette, his eyes fixed on my window. Our gazes met across the parking lot, and he raised his hand in that mocking wave I remembered so well. Then he climbed into the Ford and drove away, his taillights disappearing around a corner. I checked out immediately, driving east until the sun rose, putting as much distance as possible between myself and that place. But I knew the truth now. I would never truly escape. The road had marked me, claimed me in some fundamental way. I could run for the rest of my life, but part of me would always be back in that clearing, among the abandoned trucks and their ghostly drivers. This is where my story stands today. I'm still traveling, still mapping, still warning those who will listen. The journal has grown into a manuscript. This manuscript, which I've duplicated and left copies of in selected locations across the country, hoping they'll reach the right people. If you're reading this, you might be one of those people. Maybe you're a trucker who's noticed strange patterns on your regular routes. Maybe you're a traveler who's had your own brush with places that shouldn't exist. Or maybe you're just someone who senses that the world is bigger, stranger, and more dangerous than most people realize. Whatever brought you to these pages, consider this both a warning and a guide. The backroads of America hide secrets that defy explanation. Thin spots exist where reality wears down, allowing something else to seep through. And once you've crossed over, even if you make it back, a part of you remains there forever. I don't know if Absuroki was always waiting for me, or if I simply took a wrong turn at the wrong moment. I don't know if the bearded man was once like me, a traveler who stayed too long and became part of the place. I don't know if I'm still being hunted or merely watched from across the divide. But I know this. The next time you're driving on a lonely road and come to an unexpected detour, think carefully before you turn. The destination on your map may not be the one waiting at the end of that road. And if you see an old Ford pickup in your rearview mirror, keeping a steady distance behind you, don't stop. Don't look back. Just drive, and pray you find your way to the main road before nightfall. Because the long haul is never really over. The road goes on forever. And sometimes, it leads to places we were never meant to go.